When you find a great podcast, like this one, you want to tell the world. And the same goes for Power Shop, because you know that you're getting your energy from Australia's only accredited carbon-neutral energy retailer, where your energy usage is fully carbon offset at no additional fee. So however you choose to use your power, you can feel pride knowing that you're choosing energy that can help make a difference. Make the switch to Power Shop today. For power you can be proud of. Accredited under the Climate Active Carbon Neutral Government-backed program.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to Aboriginal elders emerging. The following podcast contains content of a graphic, violent nature and is not suitable for children.
Now, they're in a foreign building. They're foreigners in a foreign country, in their pyjamas, in their underwear, and it's cold as well. They're in a building which is like a rabbit warren, a lot of little thin corridors. And if you just picture what they're going through, they've lost all sense of direction. A lot of them are literally making split-second decisions which are about to decide their fate.
What happened on the 23rd of June 2000 would be the biggest and most tragic story Paul Cochrane ever covered. It's the Childers Backpackers Hostel fire, an act of arson that resulted in the deaths of 15 people from all over the world. The victims were backpackers who were staying at the hostel while they earned money to fund their travel dreams, picking fruit on some of the farms in the area.
This is Australian True Crime with Michelle Laurie and Emily Webb. Come with us as we go beyond the news cycle to find out how people become killers, how people become victims, and what happens next.
Paul has produced a multi-episode podcast called Childers, The Full Story, where he speaks to people who survived the fire, the families of some of the young people who died, the former mayor of the town, the firefighters, even Karl Stefanovic, who was in his first week of his TV career when he was sent to cover the story. Now, to mark the 20th anniversary of this tragedy, we'll hear from Paul Cochrane about the Childers Backpackers Hostel fire.
On the 23rd of June, it was the fifth day, my fifth week in television. 5 weeks earlier, I turned up and was handed a tape with the Million Paws Walk, when people go and walk their puppy dog for charity. And I remember asking the editor, how do I even work this machine? Well, 5 weeks later, I'm responsible for the biggest story in the world at the time, and seeing grief and trauma at its most extreme. Seeing a media congregation in front of me learning on the run and working out how to do this game that we call media, and really feeling such a heavy burden of responsibility to deliver a story that A, did it justice, B, reflected well on me, but also did some justice to the people who got out of there, who had such compelling narrative on the ground and were going through something that nothing in their life could have ever prepared them for. I look back on it now, and 25 years in the media, it is clearly the biggest story I've ever covered, and hopefully the biggest story I will ever cover, because the magnitude of grief and just how big that story was, I'd find it really difficult to find something that could compare to it. It just moved at such a rapid rate and so regularly. I've never been part of anything that had so many elements that continually evolved like the Childers story. And at the time, regions in Australia really were divided up, and a network took a patch, and Channel 7 local news was the local news for that region, and Bundaberg was the outskirts of the boundary of my realm. We were running off one camera, so two operators. One would do edit, one would do camera, and two journalists, and we would have to put a half-hour news bulletin together. You go into the big cities in TV, and there used to be a saying you might do one story per day, perhaps. Well, that didn't happen in the regions. We were 3 stories. We would go to Childers maybe once a month, and what we try and do normally is we try and stockpile some stories. We'd have some timeless yarns that we could roll out and give Childers their voice on the local news. Childers is a really small highway town. A lot of people would be familiar with Bundaberg. It's famous for its rum and its sugarcane, and Childers is about a 40-minute drive south of Bundaberg. It's about 300 kilometres north of Brisbane, which is the capital of Queensland. Very much a heritage town. A lot of the buildings in Childers are heritage listed. The Palace Backpacker Hostel was a 100-year-old building that had been heritage listed. Ironically, in the condition it was in, the facade of the building looked very similar because it was the victim itself of a fire in 1902, which went through the town, took out about 100 metres of the street. In the early 90s, a man goes to the owner of the building with a business idea. He'd like to turn it into a backpacker hostel, which really is a great business model given the nature of the town. A lot of need for itinerant work. And for a backpacker, that presented a great opportunity because you could be from overseas. You don't need to come in with a huge professional skill set. You can come in, you can earn a few dollars, work for a few weeks. The farmers get what they need. They're getting their crops picked. The backpackers are getting a few dollars in their pocket. They can continue north up to Whitsundays, a really captive area for the tourist market, or further south down to Brisbane, continue their travels that way. And the Palace at the time was, in its early days, was equipped to accommodate about 90 people. And a lot of people have been in the shoes of those backpackers. They've put a backpack on their back. They've gone overseas, looked for the cheapest possible bed they can find, go out of a day. If they're not working, you're travelling, you're sightseeing. And that's what these people were doing. Putting a backpack on your back doesn't mean that you've got no hope in life. These were some very serious people who had great lofty ambitions, who were simply just taking a small break in their life, whether they just graduated uni or school or were just having a break from their professional careers to come to Australia, sightsee. And the reason they were in Childers was because it offered the opportunity to line their pockets with a few dollars that would supplement and finance their travel.
It was the evening of the 23rd of June 2000. What happens on that night?
There was 3 Welsh girls who travelled to Australia, and one of them was going home for her brother's wedding the next day. So there was a group of them who worked together on one of the tomato farms. The reports are that they continually being chipped for their perhaps slack attitude on the farm that day because their attention was clearly focused on going out for a few beers that night. They were going to say farewell to one of the Welsh girls, Sarah Williams. And so there was a few of them went over to the pub, few light drinks and back to bed because they know they've got to be up early the next morning. A lot of them are in bed between that 9:30 to 11 p.m. Just after midnight, a lot of the backpackers that I've spoken to have talked about what they thought was perhaps a fight going on or plates being smashed, or one of them even said they thought that perhaps there were some fireworks being set off in and around the building. Obviously, it wakes them from their slumber, but the doors are closed, so the full gravity of what's happening outside of that door hasn't necessarily hit them as much, but there is starting to be a smoke starting to come in under the seal of the door. A lot of them say they get up, turn the light on, and it stays on for a second, 2 seconds, and the power's cut. But it gives them a sense of what they've confronted. It's a cloud in front of them. When they open the door, they walk out and they can't see the hand in front of their face. They're confronted by the full brunt of heavy, thick smoke. They can't take a breath. You take a breath, that's your last breath. So they're holding their breath and they're trying to assess where they are. Now, they're in a foreign building. They're foreigners in a foreign country, in their pajamas, in their underwear, and it's cold as well. It was incredibly foggy that night, so it had an eerie feel about it as well. They're in a building which is like a rabbit warren, a lot of little thin corridors. And if you just picture what they're going through, they've lost all sense of direction. Some of them had only just arrived, so they actually hadn't fully familiarised themselves with the building. They're also trying to process what's going on. There's no smoke alarms. Probably got an expectation that if there's a fire, probably there's a smoke alarm. So they're trying to process what's going on. They're in that first hour to 2 hours of sleep, so clearly deeply weary. Some of them have had a few beers, so they've got that level of lag about their cognition as well at the time. No illuminated exit signs, and they can't see. They can't see the hand in front of their face. A lot of them are literally making split-second decisions which are about to decide their fate. Walk into the eye of the fire, that could be the decision that decides whether you live or die. It's an incredibly moving process that a lot of them went through. Some of the people that I've spoken to have talked about seeing the white light and actually coming to terms with almost a resignation that they're about to die. That, okay, I didn't think this is